Hello BookTube, it's Eleanor here, and today I'm doing a review of The Lying Game by Ruth Ware. I was very kindly sent this by the publishers for review, but obviously it will not affect my review in any way. This is my own personal thoughts on the book. This is the first book starting my week of crime thriller reviews, so I hope that you enjoy it, and I want to talk about this one first. This is the story of four girls who all went to boarding school together when they were younger, and they have all sort of kept in touch very slightly but not seen each other very much. At the start of the book, a text message comes through to three of the girls saying that I need you, and they drop everything and go to this girl's aid. This girl, Kate, still lives in the same town of Salten, which is where they went to boarding school, so they all drop their lives and they head down there at this one text message which we don't really know the reason for. Our main character Isa has a young baby, and she takes the baby with her and she heads down to see her friend. We learn through Isa about her first days at this boarding school, getting to know these three girls that will be lifelong friends, and the game that they played at school. They called it the lying game. They scored points depending on how well they could lie in different situations, and they just treated it as a fun game, and they didn't really care if it hurt anybody or hurt anyone's feelings. It was really enticing for the new girls, Isa and Fatima, who start and meet Thea and Kate, who are the sort of old girls who've been at the boarding school for a while. They join up with them, and it's enticing for them to get involved in this game. We flip between the past and the present in this book. We're looking at Isa joining the boarding school in the past and the lead up to what sort of happened, and we're also following the present day at the repercussions, because something has now happened which could bring to light something that they have covered up in the past. I'm not going to tell you any more because I don't want to ruin the story, but I want to talk about my pros and cons for this. On the pro side, this was a really fast-paced and very readable book. I whizzed through it, and I also read parts and listened to parts on audio, and the audio was very good for this. I thought the narrator did a really good job of distinguishing the different characters. It's set in a boarding school setting in part, and that really appeals to my sort of Mallory Towers days. I really liked the boarding school element, and I like the concept and the ideas behind how people live in boarding schools at a young age. I think it heightens a lot of emotions, it makes things a lot more real, and there can be a lot more openness for trouble and issues, because you are putting a load of girls in a situation where they're spending pretty much 24/7 together. I liked the fact it was set in the UK. I thought that was really nice. It was nice to have a UK setting, which we don't often get. I also really enjoyed the feminism in this book. I really enjoyed the fact that these were all strong women. They all had really good jobs. I liked the fact we had Isa. She was a new mum. She's breastfeeding. We don't skim over those things. We don't skim over the things that would be important to her. We don't miss the fact that she has to whop her boobs out in a pub to breastfeed and her feelings behind that, and we don't miss, you know, what it might be like travelling with a young baby and those pressures that might be on her, you know, as a young mum, the things that she might be thinking about, the things that she might be worried about. Some issues involving Isa and the baby, however, I did find a little confusing. There's a point in the book where Isa needs to leave the baby with a babysitter, and she leaves the baby with a young girl of 16, I think, who she's never met before, and I found that very unusual, considering she wouldn't even leave the baby with her husband for the day without feeling anxious. And although she does sense anxiety, she leaves the baby with a relative stranger who is 16, and I found that as a mum I would never do that, or I would, you know, I would at least have wanted to know the person and for them to have met my child first. So I thought that was a little bit confusing and unusual. I also enjoyed Fatima's character. Fatima is a Muslim. She's always been a Muslim. However, people haven't perceived her as a Muslim. Now, I think that's a really interesting idea. Like, when you look at someone, you don't you just see the person. I mean, I do. You see the person, you see who they are. You might think, I wonder what religion they are. And that might come up in conversation if you're friends. But since leaving school, Fatima has become a much more observant Muslim. So she now wears a headscarf, she observes Ramadan, and she doesn't drink. And it's interesting to see how those things affect her in everyday life. She doesn't drink alcohol, and she's constantly in these situations where people are like, well, why don't you have alcohol? Why don't you have a little bit? And there's constantly people asking about her headscarf and her choices there. And as if the headscarf makes her a different type of Muslim to the one she was before. And I really liked how those ideas were brought up in the book. So there's some really good and interesting themes that are brought up here, and some really good issues tackled, and and they're really well done in the book. On the negative side for me, I felt like the plot was a little predictable, and I'm just not sure that I would call it a thriller, because there were thrilling moments in this, but I felt it was much more of a sort of general fiction story with some thrilling elements because of the predictability, because of the aspect of it, because I didn't necessarily feel like anyone was ever in danger. I don't know, I just wouldn't see it as sort of a crime thriller. I'm not sure if it had the right elements for me in that way. I prefer, if I'm reading a crime thriller, to be really tense and on the edge of my seat, and I didn't get that with this. That's not to say it's not a great book, it's just that I didn't get that thrilling crime sense for me because it felt a little predictable. And the other thing I struggled with a little bit is that I didn't really connect with Isa as a main character. I felt like I just didn't get enough of her. I didn't feel anything. I didn't really like her too much and her character, and at times I sensed her anxiety with her daughter, but because of those issues where it didn't make sense to me, where she left her daughter with a 16-year-old that she'd never met, even though she wouldn't leave the baby easily with her husband, and she didn't want to move the baby into its own room, and she's still breastfeeding and the baby is quite old now. I don't know, I just felt there was an element of that where I just couldn't connect and understand and empathise with the character, and none of the other characters really gave me that either, and I really do like to have that emotional connection. So I really enjoyed it. And it had its pros and cons. It was definitely a fast-paced, fun read, and I definitely recommend the audio. The audio narrator did great with this. So in conclusion, I liked the book. It was compelling, it was a fast read, and I liked the elements that it touched on. I was just a little disappointed of the crime part of it and the lack of suspense and character connectability for me. So I gave this one 3 stars, and look out for tomorrow for my next thriller read. Bye for now, BookTube.